August 24, 2025. Just after 3:17 a.m., a loud explosion echoed across the quiet night sky of western Russia. At first, locals thought it was thunder, but seconds later the ground shook beneath their feet. What they didn't know yet, a Ukrainian drone had just slammed into the Kursk nuclear power plant, one of the largest facilities in the Russian Federation. By sunrise, flames were already consuming a transformer building. Radiation levels were checked instantly. Geiger counters scanned every corridor. Officials in Moscow were forced to admit that one reactor's capacity was cut in half, and the image of a nuclear plant on fire was broadcast around the world. Eyewitnesses reported seeing 4 drones approaching from the south, flying low at around 120 kilometers per hour. They were almost silent, hugging the tree line, evading radar for as long as possible. At 3:12 a.m., Russian anti-aircraft guns near the facility opened fire, but one drone broke through. At 3:17 a.m., it slammed into a high-voltage transformer unit, sending sparks raining down and igniting oil tanks. Flames reached 30 meters high. Sirens wailed inside the plant. For the first time since Chernobyl, the word nuclear and the word attack were in the same sentence on Russian soil. Moscow scrambled to reassure the public. Officials insisted the reactor cores are stable. There is no radiation leak, but panic had already spread. Within hours, videos filmed by local residents showed an orange fireball lighting up the night sky. While Kursk burned, another blow struck 1,200 kilometers to the northwest. At 4:02 a.m., drones descended on the Luga fuel export terminal, a vital hub on the Gulf of Finland. Luga isn't just any oil terminal, it handles up to 36 million tons of fuel a year, feeding Russia's energy exports to Europe and Asia. That night, Ukrainian drones hit storage tanks directly. The result? A massive inferno that could be seen from 40 kilometers away. Flames roared, black smoke billowed into the sky, and shipping halted instantly. By mid-morning, Russia admitted what the footage already showed. Luga had suffered one of the most damaging strikes since the war began. The timing was no accident. The strikes came on Ukraine's Independence Day, a symbolic reminder that even after years of invasion, Kyiv had the ability to strike deep into Russian territory. And these weren't isolated hits. Just days earlier, Ukrainian engineers had unveiled their newest weapon, the FP-5 Flamingo cruise missile. With a range of 3,000 kilometers and a 1,150-kilogram warhead, it could hit Moscow, St. Petersburg, or even Russian bases in the Arctic. At a production rate of 200 missiles per month, the Flamingo represented something new. Ukraine was no longer dependent only on Western weapons. It was becoming a self-reliant weapons producer. But how did these drones break through Russia's layered air defenses? The answer lies in Ukraine's next-generation drone technology. Some of the drones are fiber optic guided, built by the Ukrainian startup Fold, making them nearly unjammable even against Russia's powerful electronic warfare systems. Others use AI-assisted navigation, able to reroute themselves mid-flight if GPS signals are jammed. Many are 3D printed, cheap to produce, sometimes for as little as $5,000 each, yet able to inflict millions in damage. For every Patriot or S-400 missile that costs $1 to $3 million, Ukraine can launch hundreds of drones. It's a war of economics as much as a war of firepower. At 5:30 a.m., Russian state media went live with emergency broadcasts. Footage of the Kursk fire and the Luga inferno couldn't be hidden. The Kremlin condemned the strikes as nuclear terrorism. But behind closed doors, Russian officials faced a terrifying reality. Ukraine's reach was growing. No target was safe. Not nuclear plants, not oil terminals, not even Russia's industrial heartlands. Russian telegram channels buzzed with panic. Some claimed the Kursk blast was larger than officials admitted. Others accused Moscow of lying about radiation levels. Trust was crumbling from within. In Washington, the Pentagon faced a dilemma. Just days earlier, U.S. officials had quietly blocked Ukraine from using ATACMS long-range missiles to strike deep inside Russia, hoping to prevent escalation. Now Ukraine had done it anyway, using its own homegrown weapons. In Brussels, NATO leaders warned that any damage to nuclear plants risked contamination across borders. The European Energy Agency confirmed that while radiation remained stable, the psychological effect of a nuclear site attack was enormous. Markets reacted instantly. Brent crude surged past $102 per barrel, the highest since 2022. Gas futures in Europe jumped 15% overnight. For ordinary citizens from Berlin to New York, the war had just raised the price of filling a tank of gas. By noon on August 24th, both Kursk and Luga were still burning. Fire crews battled for hours to contain the blazes. Russia vowed revenge. Ukraine celebrated a symbolic Independence Day strike that sent shockwaves across the world. But what came next would take the conflict into an entirely new phase, one defined not just by missiles and drones, but by innovation, sabotage, and global consequences that no one could ignore. August 25th, 2025, 7:46 a.m. in Kiev, President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the nation. His words were simple but sharp. On our Independence Day, we reminded the world and Moscow that Ukraine cannot be silenced. Across the country, citizens celebrated the strikes with mixed emotions. Pride because Ukraine had proven it could strike deep into Russia's heart. Fear because everyone knew retaliation was coming. Within 24 hours, Russian forces launched a counterstrike. At 2:14 a.m., August 26th, cruise missiles roared toward Kyiv, Lviv, and Odessa. Russia claimed it was punishing Ukraine for nuclear terrorism. But Ukraine's defenses were waiting. Patriot batteries near Kyiv intercepted 3 Iskander missiles in less than 90 seconds. Across the West, NASAMS and IRIST systems shot down dozens of drones. Still, some broke through. In Odessa, a missile strike killed 3 civilians and damaged grain export facilities. Black smoke poured over the port. Russia wanted to show strength, but much of its firepower had been blunted. While Russia retaliated, Ukraine doubled down. In secret workshops from Kharkiv to Lviv, engineers were working around the clock. This wasn't just military effort, it was civilian innovation on a wartime scale. Startups like Firepoint produced hundreds of drones daily, some assembled in basements, others in abandoned factories. The crown jewel of this effort, the 425th Unmanned Systems Regiment, nicknamed OCHI, the Eyes. Originally a small experimental unit, by 2025 it had grown into a full regiment. Thousands of drones, from hand-launched scouts to explosive FPV kamikazes, patrolled the skies. Operators as young as 20 guided drones across enemy lines, hitting tanks, artillery, and command posts. And now, with the success of the Kursk and Luga strikes, the regiment's mission had expanded, deep operations inside Russia itself. But drones weren't the only weapon. Across occupied territory, a shadow war was unfolding. At 11:32 p.m. on August 27th, an ammunition train in Belgorod derailed after an explosion ripped through its tracks. 2 nights later, fuel trucks in Bryansk burst into flames, the result of a resistance bombing. Ukrainian intelligence called it the invisible front. No uniforms, no open battlefields, just sabotage, silence, and sudden fire. Russia could count tanks and missiles. But how do you counter resistance that moves in shadows? The attacks on Kursk and Luga rattled world capitals. In Brussels, NATO convened emergency meetings. Diplomats admitted privately that they feared a nuclear plant disaster could spill into Europe. In Ottawa, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, pledged a fresh aid package, including armored vehicles and artillery shells. Sweden joined, promising advanced radar systems to strengthen Ukraine's defenses. In Washington, the Pentagon's restrictions on long-range missile use were questioned. If Ukraine could build Flamingo missiles with 3,000-kilometer range, was limiting U.S. ATACMS really going to stop escalation? Energy markets shuddered. Oil tankers slowed in the Baltic, driving up insurance premiums. By the end of the week, Brent crude held above $102, and analysts warned it could climb higher if Ukraine struck again. Inside Russia, state TV worked overtime. Anchors thundered about Ukrainian nuclear terror. But on Telegram, the truth was harder to hide. Videos of Kursk's burning transformers and Luga's fireball circulated widely. Some Russians demanded harsher retaliation. Others asked a dangerous question. If Ukraine can hit nuclear plants, what else can it hit? The Kremlin wanted control. But the strikes had sown fear and doubt inside Russia itself. something Moscow hadn't faced since the early days of the war. Analysts called it a turning point, not because Kursk or Ust-Luga crippled Russia's war machine, but because of what they symbolized: the evolution of modern conflict. Wars are no longer decided only by tanks and soldiers. They're decided by swarms of drones, cheap and fast, overwhelming billion-dollar defenses. Nations don't just fight with armies, they fight with startups, engineers, and 3D printers, producing weapons as fast as code can be written. Battles don't stay at the front lines. They leap across borders, striking energy terminals, ports, and nuclear plants, dragging civilians into the heart of war. The August 24th strikes proved this. The battlefield is everywhere, and no nation, not even Russia, is untouchable. The fires at Kursk and Ust-Luga burned for hours. By the time they were extinguished, the war had already shifted. Ukraine had shown the world that it could reach into Russia's deepest strongholds. Russia vowed revenge. NATO braced for escalation. And millions of ordinary people, Ukrainians, Russians, Europeans, wondered what tomorrow would bring. Because in this war, one truth has become clear. Every strike carries the risk of a new and dangerous chapter.